Hi everyone, welcome to the new CENTER Maine Weather Office. I'm meteorologist Ryan Breton. This time of the year, the question we are asked the most is, what are your thoughts on the winter ahead? And I know some people may say, you can't get the weather right tomorrow, why forecast an entire season ahead? But we can look at clues in the atmosphere and start to put pieces together to come up with a general idea of how the winter may play out. So come on out with me. We'll head on over to the green screen and break it down in this year's Maine Winter Outlook. So let's start with a look at recent winters. They've overall been pretty lame in a lot of southern Maine. Each of the last 5 winters in Portland have come in with below average snowfall. The average each winter is about 68.7 inches of snow, and last winter stands out as far below average. Only 38 inches of snow falling in Portland made it really tough for anybody who wanted to get out and enjoy the snow. The few points in the winter when we had it in southern Maine, there really wasn't enough to do cross-country skiing or anything fun outdoors in the snow. Central Maine, pretty similar story. Each of the last 5 winters in Bangor coming in below average, although 2 winters ago was pretty close. Last winter stands out though, only 45.5 inches of snow falling in Bangor. Up in the county, it's been a different story. In fact, of the last 5 winters, 3 of them coming in a bit above the average of 118 inches. In fact, 5 winters ago, 151 inches of snow fell in Caribou. But last winter, below average, 88 inches of snow. Still though, a below average winter in the county produces quite a bit of snow. As for this winter, the starting point for any winter outlook begins actually in the Pacific Ocean, looking at whether or not we're in El Nino or La Nina. This is defined by the water temperature in and around the equator in the Pacific Ocean. When this water is warmer than average, we are in what's called El Nino. And the reason this is important is it can influence weather patterns worldwide, particularly the jet stream, which helps steers our storms. It affects us here in the U.S., even though it's a pattern that originates in the Pacific Ocean. Last winter was an El Nino winter, and it's a big reason why it was quite warm and didn't produce much snow, particularly in central and southern Maine. There are signs, though, this winter that we may be getting into a La Nina, which is when the water in this region is cooler than average. The big question for this winter, though, is does La Nina develop? How quickly does it, and how strong does it come on? Right now, most of the indications are La Nina hasn't really shown up yet. You see areas of red and blue here, the red indicating water temperatures that are above average, the blue indicating water temperatures that are below average. Right now, this area is pretty much in what's called the neutral phase, or sometimes referred to as La Nada. It's not El Nino, it's not La Nina. So this winter, this isn't a strong signal for our global pattern, but it is something we have to take into consideration, because if La Nina does develop this winter, it may have an impact on the jet stream. And usually in a La Nina winter, you have a ridge in the jet stream out over the Pacific, which then sends colder weather into the northern and northwestern part of the country, while in the southeast, it's warmer. The signals for precipitation are wetter out west and also wetter through parts of the Ohio Valley. There's not really a strong signal for precipitation here in the northeast, which is common in La Nina patterns, but sometimes this warmer air can come up and create more mixing situations in stronger La Ninas. We'll just have to see how quickly this one comes on and how strong it comes on through the winter. So that's one element in one part of the globe that we look at when considering the winter outlook. Another one is in a totally different part of the earth, looking up toward Eurasia and specifically Siberia at the amount of snow that falls and covers the ground in the month of October. When there's a lot of snow that falls up here early in the fall, it actually makes winter cold outbreaks here in the United States more likely. You can think of it as a refrigerator, kind of setting the stage for winter. And if there's a lot of snow covering the ground up here in the fall, it makes it more likely that that cold gets sent south our way during the winter. The opposite is true, though, if there isn't much snow cover here during the month of October. It makes cold outbreaks less likely. You've probably heard of the polar vortex. There's a correlation between the amount of snow on the ground here during the month of October and the strength of the polar vortex in the winter. If there isn't much snow, that polar vortex stays strong, not sending cold air south. But if there is a considerable amount of snow covering the ground, there are signs that polar vortex may weaken down during the winter and send some of that cold our way. How are we doing this year? Well, it came in pretty close to average actually for Eurasian snow cover, maybe a tick above. Fairly similar though the last few years. So this has not been a strong signal for how the winter would play out each of the last few years. There is one year though that stands out with particularly high snow cover in this region during the month of October, and it's 2014. In that winter, we had serious cold and serious snow, especially in the month of February. We've looked all around the globe, so now let's bring it a little bit closer to home, looking specifically at the Gulf of Maine and the water temperatures within the Gulf of Maine. Right now, they're running warmer than average, and that's something that we have seen each of the last several years. In fact, the recent few years are among the warmest on record for water temperatures in the Gulf of Maine. This is a symptom of climate change in that the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than many other parts of the ocean in the world. How does this impact our winter outlook? Well, if you get a storm, particularly early in the season, and there's any type of onshore wind, that can warm the coast. This can almost act as a warming or heating influence and change any snow over to chilly rain. This often has a bigger impact in early season storms because it takes longer for the ocean each winter to cool down. It's coldest usually in February and March. So if we do have any storms in December and January that don't take a perfect track, we're likely to have mixing and some rain perhaps on parts of the coastline. Another method used in seasonal forecasting is called analog years. This, in other words, means looking at past years, comparing their weather pattern then to the weather pattern now, and seeing if we can pick out any similarities. The problem is climate change needs to be considered. A year in the decade of the 1970s with a similar pattern may not play out the same way in the 2020s, given how our climate has warmed since then. But there is a recent year, 2016-2017, that matches up somewhat with this winter. That is a weak La Nina winter following El Nino, and it seems like that's where we're heading. We were in El Nino last winter, and it's possible La Nina develops during this winter. So how did that one play out? Well, temperatures were above average through the 3-month period, and snowfall actually was near to above average, especially in southern Maine. Portland actually came in with more than 20 inches of snow above average. And weak La Ninas have my attention. If you look at the past several weak La Ninas going back many decades, there is a signal that weak La Ninas tend to favor above average snowfall in a lot of central and southern Maine. Now, of course, the question is, will this happen this time if we get into a weak La Nina? You can't bet the house that this is how it will play out, but it is one factor that I have in mind that we could see above average snowfall in some parts of the state. So putting all of the pieces together, this is what you've been waiting for, the winter outlook. And a little bit of context first. We average 68.7 inches of snow each year in Portland, close to 75 in Bangor, and more than 100 inches of snow up in the mountains. The big question is, does La Nina develop, and how quickly does it come on? The faster it comes on, the more influence it could have on our winter. But I'm not guaranteeing that will happen. So it would take a lot to predict above average snowfall given all of the other characteristics of this winter's pattern. I'd say though there's a pretty good bet for near average snowfall in a good part of the state, probably leaning below average though on the coast from Portland south through York County and certainly down through southern New England. This doesn't have the look of a good winter for our friends around Boston. So what does that mean? 60 to 70 inches of snow in Portland, if I had to put a number to it, 65 to 75 in Bangor. And I think in the mountains up north, it could be a pretty sizable winter with near average snowfall, which for them is over 100 inches of snow. So as for temperature this winter, there could be 1 or 2 brief Arctic blasts, but overall, this looks like a winter that will feature warmer than average temperatures through December, January, and February combined. Snowfall, more than last year, unlikely to be above average, or at least I'm not willing to commit to that, so near to below average snowfall, particularly in southern Maine, would be my expectation. Last winter, we had several rainstorms in December and January, some of them causing really serious flooding when combined with snowmelt. We're unlikely to repeat that this year. That was a characteristic of El Nino, and this year we're out of that pattern and headed toward La Nina. So those are some thoughts on the winter ahead. Once the season's over, we'll either be able to laugh at how poorly it worked out or say we actually had a pretty decent winter, even in parts of southern Maine. Thanks for joining me here on News Center Maine Plus. I'm meteorologist Ryan Breton. Remember, you can stay with our weather team all winter long. We always have you covered on air and online.